when I surrender, I feel safe. Because God knows. I can just let go and trust because God knows. I love how perfectly the ideas in that song just sort of encapsulate the destination of this journey that we've been on this month. This journey to transformation, this journey that each of us has been undertaking. You know, this idea that we've been working with, that when we do the forgiveness work, when we are grateful for the experiences of God in our lives, that the presence of God shows up within us in new and exciting ways. That's where we've been going. That's the destination we've been headed towards. And today, Palm Sunday is a celebration of that. You see, it's no coincidence that Palm Sunday happened to align with the theme for what we're here to discuss today, with this idea of celebration and arrival, with this idea of realizing the presence of God that is active within you and celebrating that presence in every moment. There's no coincidence that happened today on Palm Sunday. Now, I love the stories in the Bible about this week, about Holy Week, because to me they are filled with so many different lessons that we can learn. There are so many lessons in the Holy Week stories. There's lessons about surrender. There's lessons about what we do when we become discouraged. There's lessons about personal salvation. There's lessons about peace. And then there's the lesson I want us to focus on today. This lesson about celebrating the arrival of the presence of God within us. This lesson about celebrating and knowing that that presence of God shows up within us. And so that brings us to Palm Sunday. You see, Palm Sunday is the start of Holy Week. It's the start of the events that lead up to the crucifixion and then resurrection of Jesus. And the story of Palm Sunday is one that most scholars will tell you is probably accurate. Scholars will say that this is something that most likely actually occurred. And they have a few reasons for that. One of them is that it's found in each of the four Gospels. They all write about it. And so their theory is that if it was important enough to write about, it probably happened, if they all included it. And there's all sorts of wonderful history about this day, and I spoke about that last year. So if you're interested in the scholarly side to Palm Sunday, I'd encourage you to look at the lesson from last year. You can find it on our website. But this year, I just wanted to share the story with you from the book of John. As I said, this is in each one of the Gospels. But in the book of John, in chapter 12, verse 12, the author of John writes, "The next day, a great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. And so they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, 'Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel.' And Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it was written, 'Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt.' His disciples did not understand these things at first. But when Jesus was glorified and they remembered the things that had been written and done about him." And so that's the Palm Sunday story. And just as an aside, how often do we hear that about the disciples, that they just don't get it? It's throughout the entire Gospels. Jesus will say something and the disciples will go, "Wait a minute, I have a question." And Jesus will go, "You don't get it." You see, the disciples represent that growing in spirit that happens in each one of us. So this is a lovely story, this Palm Sunday story, and it's one, as I said, that we're fairly certain probably happened, that Jesus probably walked into Jerusalem or rode into Jerusalem in a high-profile way. But what exactly does this have to do with us today, in our lives, as we strive to understand how the presence and power of God works within us? How does this story of Jesus entering Jerusalem relate to us? Well, what I did is I went back and I looked at some of our Unity resources. I looked at a book that's compiled from ideas from Charles Fillmore. It's called the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. And these are all the ideas that Mr. Fillmore, one of our co-founders in Unity, had about what various things that are in the Bible could mean, with the idea being that we're going to look at these meanings and then give it personal meaning for ourselves. And so I looked at what he had to say about Jesus. And Mr. Fillmore wrote that Jesus represented God's divine idea of us, that it was the divine wholeness that we are. And then I looked at what he wrote about Jerusalem. And Mr. Fillmore wrote that Jerusalem represents that place in our soul where the consciousness of spiritual peace lives. And then he went on to write that it was a place within us that grows, that this consciousness of peace grows as we reach new spiritual understandings. And so if we put those two things together, those two ideas together, the meaning that I see in the story of Jesus entering into Jerusalem is this idea that when we've been working with this divine concept, when we've been working with something that we want to transform our lives into, eventually that moment's going to come when that divine idea arrives within our soul. And when it does, we celebrate that divine idea. That place of peace, it grows within us. And we have a greater understanding of the world of God around us. Now, I realized something as I was looking over this concept. And what came to me was this idea that this Palm Sunday story, sure, it only happens once in the books, but this is something that's happening in our lives every moment. Every time you have a new spiritual revelation, every time you have a new spiritual insight, that divine idea comes to you, and that place of peace grows within you. You see, there aren't just one or two seeds that get planted that grow into the fullness that we are. These spiritual ideas, these spiritual seeds, they are constantly growing within us, constantly a part of who and what we are. I thought about this when I was thinking of my journey through ministerial school. You see, when I first started into ministerial school, I had the idea that just one seed had been planted. And that it was just this one seed that was trying to grow me into becoming a minister. How wrong I was. Because what I found out as I went through the process at Unity Institute was that it wasn't one seed. It was a bunch of little seeds that had been planted all along. It was seeds that were planted by classmates, seeds that were planted by instructors that began to grow and bloom. You see, the important message from today isn't where those seeds come from. It's not where we find those seeds of spiritual growth within us or how we make them grow. The message for today is celebrating the moment when we realize that they've grown within us. Looking at it and saying, thank you, God, for all that has grown in my life. And I know those seeds are transforming us. I know they're transforming you individually. You've told me. I look around our community here. I look around this building, and I can see seeds of transformation that are springing forth. I mean, physically, we can look at the difference in the carpet, no, but also in our community outreach. New ideas are bursting forth, and our transformation is going to continue. That's what I want you to leave here today with that idea that the transformation continues, that you are blessed on your journey, that you continue to be blessed on your journey. And every moment, your growth never stops. And so God bless you. God bless each one of you on your journey. Oh, wait, just one more thing. Just one more thing. You know, my wife loves stories. Absolutely loves stories. And And the thing about my wife is the type of stories that my wife loves are the happy stories, the rainbows, the butterflies, and unicorns, and all that wonderful stuff. And so I'd be just a little remiss if I didn't go ahead and finish the story for you. Because at least once I've been caught with, oh, let's watch this, or let's hear this story, and then the dark stuff shows up, and I get this look. I didn't tell her that was coming. There might be just one or two more things for you to have to go through before you fully realize your Christ potential. You know, the story of Jesus and Holy Week, it doesn't end with his triumphant entry into Jerusalem. It goes on from there. Jesus had one more thing that he had to go through before he could fully realize his Christ potential. And the same thing happens to us. There's those times in our lives, and I know there's a few of you out here who know what I'm talking about. How many of you have ever had this experience? This experience of, I think and I feel like I've finally reached this level of spiritual understanding. I finally get it. Everything's going well. I've got these new spiritual ideas that are flowing to me. All is right with the world. And then something happens. Something comes out of nowhere that you weren't expecting, something that you thought you'd already dealt with, and yet there it is for you to deal with it again. Now let me give you an example of the kind of things that I'm talking about here. You see, back in November, Sarah and I, we made our T3 commitment to this church. We sat down and we looked at what we wanted to give. We wanted to give of our treasure in a way that we'd never given before. And so we made the commitment to start giving. One of the things that Charles Fillmore would famously say is he would tell people to try these principles out, to test them, to see if they work for you, to not just sit and listen and assume that's the way it works, but put it to the test. And so we put it to the test. And we started giving. And for a long time, things were going really, really good for us. We had a beautiful daughter. I even had to begin experiencing that thing that I would hear so many people talking about, where when I was giving and in that flow of abundance, checks would just show up that I wasn't expecting. I mean, it was a wonderful time. And then I woke up one morning on a Saturday, and I walked downstairs to get coffee, and there's water all over the kitchen floor. And I went, well, now this is odd. And so we cleaned it up, and I figured, well, this is what insurance is for. So we'll call the insurance out, and they'll figure out where the leak is, and we'll get it repaired, and this is why we have insurance. So we file the claim, the adjusters come out, and they look at it, and it turns out that it was the dishwasher that leaked. I guess this happens somewhat frequently with dishwashers. But what we didn't know is that if something's been happening for more than 14 days, it's not covered by your insurance policy. Now, how we were supposed to know that something that was behind the wall was I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But Sarah and I looked at each other, and we just had this moment of, well, here it is. Okay, that was a great run that we had, but now our luck has run out. And so we felt like, well, we're back down on that roller coaster again. And as we were kind of lamenting that, well, now we're going to have to spend all of this money, and we're doing so good for so long, and what's happened, I had this realization. See, I had this realization that it wasn't my luck that ran out, that this was just something that had come up to challenge those beliefs that I'd had about giving and about the abundance that I was receiving. And my mind went back to a classic unity teaching. This is a teaching from the early days of unity. You see, unity has a name for this. Actually, I've heard Mary Baker Eddy also talked about this concept a lot, but there's a term for this. We call it chemicalization. And chemicalization, it's a sort of an interesting name for it, and it's a teaching from the very early days of unity. And what I want you to know about those early days of unity, late 1890s, early 1900s. And so this is right after the scientific revolution. And the most important thing to those early founders in the unity movement was to prove what we were doing scientifically. They felt like scientifically we were going to prove the presence of God works. And so when you read the early Charles Fillmore writings and when you look into a lot of that early history, you see that scientific language. And so we have this term chemicalization. Also, the idea of chemicalization is controversial in unity. We're going to push the envelope a little bit here today. See, we don't like this idea of chemicalization. Because in unity, we like this idea that the world is joyful, God is all good, and we are happy because we know that God is all good. And when we live in that place, our world is wonderful and roses and unicorns and butterflies. But yet we know a different truth, right? Occasionally, we don't experience rainbows and butterflies and all the wonderful things in the world. Occasionally, stuff comes up for us to deal with. Things happen that make us feel uncomfortable. Water shows up all over your kitchen floor, and we have to deal with that. Let me give you an example. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. So, wheel this over so that you can see this a little bit better. So in this glass, I have vinegar. Just plain white household vinegar. Now, I know what you're saying. That's not vinegar because it's blue. I put blue food coloring in so that you could see it better, but this is vinegar. And this vinegar represents us. Now, vinegar is an acid, so we're going to say it represents our beliefs, the things we're holding on to in our lives. And it's kind of acidic when you've got that stuff in you that you need to let go of. So that represents us. Now, what happens with chemicalization is that we get these new divine ideas. Just like Sarah and I were exploring that divine idea of giving and honoring our commitments. And so to represent those divine ideas, we have baking soda. Now, I had really hoped this was going to be Arm & Hammer baking soda so that I could make the kind of analogy to this idea that God is all-powerful and God has our back and everything, and it's always save. So, when you rely on the presence of God within you, you will always be saved from whatever it is that you're experiencing. And so what happens when we chemicalize things is that we get this divine idea, we get this sacred scoop of divine ideas into our lives. And those divine ideas come in. And they agitate us. They bring those old beliefs that we were having bubbling up to the surface. You see, what we're witnessing here is a chemical reaction. And if I remember my middle school science correctly, one of the things that you can tell happens in a chemical reaction is that there's change. Whatever it is that you've put together, the reaction occurs, and then there's change that happens as a result of that. There's a new substance that's been created. That's no longer vinegar in there. I forget what the chemical is, but it's a different chemical. And the same happens to us. When those divine ideas come within us, we are changed. The very core of what we are is changed. But because that presence and power of God is always good, what we know is that those changes that are happening within us are ultimately changes for the better. But that doesn't mean it's comfortable while it's happening. So as you're going through this time of transformation, as you're going through this time of change, know that some stuff might come up for you that causes a little bit of discomfort, that causes some fear, some anxiety. That's okay, because we've been given tools to deal with that. You see, we have powerful prayer tools that allow us to deal with this bubbling over of the things that no longer serve us. Because even though it feels like a big thing when you're confronted with it, spiritually, it is no different than that liquid bubbling over in that jar. It's that old stuff getting rid of from within. And so the tools that we use to deal with this thing are affirmations and denials. See, we can use this affirmative power of prayer to change our mind about how we're perceiving the world around us. We can use the power of denying to deny the power that the world around us has over us. And I think that's an important thing to remember with this idea of denial. Because what we're denying is not that something's actually happening. That would be foolish. It would be foolish for me when I was ill and not feeling well to stand there and deny that I was sick. Clearly, I'm sick, I'm coughing, and there's stuff coming out of my nose. What I am denying is the power that illness has to control my life. And so if you think of a denial and an affirmation like a pencil, like the old number 2 pencils, with an eraser on one end and a lead on the other, we use the denial to erase whatever it is that we're experiencing, that we no longer want to have in our lives, that we no longer want to have power over us. And then we use the lead end to create, to write whatever it is that we want to experience in our lives. That power and presence of God. Emily Cady is the author of the Unity book, Lessons in Truth. And she writes about this idea of chemicalization in that book. Now, remember I said it's a controversial topic, so depending on what edition of Lessons in Truth you pick up, it may or may not be in there. It was edited out of some because people felt it was too negative. But she writes about this concept in her book. And what she does is she actually gives us a denial and an affirmation to use during these times, to use when that stuff starts bubbling up. And the affirmation, or the denial, I'll read the denial first and then the affirmation. The denial she gives us is that there is nothing to fear. Absolutely nothing to fear. So we're denying that appearance that's in front of us and the power the fear has over us. And then the affirmation that follows it says, perfect love reigns and all is well. Peace be still. And so we deny the power of fear and we affirm that perfect love, the love of God, reigns over us. So altogether it sounds like there is nothing to fear, absolutely nothing to fear. Perfect love reigns and all is well. Peace be still. I want you to hear me very, very clearly when I say it's okay if you have doubt, if you have fear when this stuff bubbles up in your life. Those are natural reactions to very real circumstances that are happening in your life. It's okay to allow that fear to come up with it. But I also want you to hear me very clearly say that we have tools to deal with how that fear affects you. You can use that power of affirmation. You can use those denials to control how you're being affected by what's happening in the world around you. But it's okay to feel that emotion. You know, as I said, the story of Holy Week continues. And on Thursday night of that week, Jesus has an opportunity to go into the garden and pray. And I'd like to share that scripture piece with you. This is the part of the story that happens just right before the arrest. And it's from the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 26. It says, "Then Jesus went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and agitated. And then he said to them, 'I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me.' And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and he prayed, 'My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want.'" You know, I think any one of us that was in that same place, that's confronted with things that we feel are too difficult, too painful to go through, would easily say, please let this cup pass over from me. I can't do this. And yet Jesus gives us such a powerful line. And he reminds us that it's not our will to be done, but God's will. And so as that stuff comes up, as you begin to doubt whether your spiritual work is doing you any good at all, we deny the power that that appearance has over us. And we affirm the truth, the spiritual truth, that it is the will of God within each one of us that is living its life out as us. And we know that it is not our will, but God's will that is done.
I only want to say, if there is a way, take this cup away from me, for I don't want to taste its poison, feel it burn me. I have changed, I'm not as sure as when we started. Then I was inspired, now I'm sad and tired. Listen, surely I've exceeded expectations. Tried for 3 years, seems like 30. Could you ask as much from any other man? But if I die, see the saga through and do the things you ask of me. Let them hate me, hit me, hurt me, nail me to their tree. I'd wanna know, my God. I'd wanna know, my God. I'd have to see, my God. I'd have to see, my God, why I should die. Would I be more noticed than I ever was before? Would the things I've said and done matter anymore? I'd have to know, my Lord. I'd have to know, my Lord. I'd have to see, my Lord. I'd have to see, my Lord. If I die, what will be my reward? If I die, what will be my reward? Have to know, I'd have to know, my Lord. Have to know, I'd have to know, my Lord. Why should I die? Why should I die? Can you show me now that I would not be killed in vain? Show me just a little of your omnipresent brain. Show me there's a reason for you wanting me to die. You're far too keen on where and how and not so hot on why. All right, I'll die.